Appreciate being here. My name is Andrew Ryan. I am a production engineer at Meta. Today I'm going to be talking to you about a program that we've been running for the last 2 years. Put over 200 students through this program. It's a pre-internship program focused on building SRE skills for college students. My talk today is ultimately about helping to ensure a better future for our industry, as well as a lemons into lemonade story during the pandemic. It's also a blueprint for other organizations, other companies out there looking to do similar things, bring in people into their industry that haven't had an opportunity to do so before. I'm going to talk about the problem that we had at Meta, how we chose to address it, and then, like I said, give you that blueprint for going forward. I want you all to leave this talk today with an understanding of what we've done and hopefully some inspiration to try some similar things at your organization. More on that later. So like I said, my name is Andrew. I've been a production engineer at Meta for almost 14 years, and I've been in this industry for 25 plus years. I've seen SRE called many things at many different places. I've also had many job titles. SRE actually didn't even exist as a job title until 2003 when it was started at Google. Before that, we called ourselves system administrators or some other verbiage. And so I'm going to put all these job titles up here because really a lot of them have so much overlap with SRE. If your company calls it something different or your job description calls it something different, that's fine. The core functions are the same, I think, focusing on reliability, troubleshooting, incident management, monitoring. And these concepts and skills, they transcend job titles, organizations, and time and space. So that's what I want to just go over in terms of like, this is what we're talking about. When we talk about SRE, we're really talking about all these things. Now, it's no secret that diversity, especially gender and ethnic diversity, in our industry is quite bad. This is true at Meta as well, and has been true for a long time. What has changed is the willingness of companies, and I think society at large, to kind of challenge that status quo. So as you can see, this is from our publicly available annual diversity report that Meta publishes once a year. About 3/4 of tech employees at Meta are identified as male, and almost 90% are either white or Asian. And at Meta, we've established concrete company-level goals around improving our diversity. We've published those goals publicly. 5 or 10 years ago, we might have thrown up our hands and said, this is too big of a problem, we can't do anything about it, but we're not doing that now. We're trying to change things. Also, I just want to add that we're not just chasing some arbitrary metric. To quote from our annual diversity report, we believe that connecting the world takes people with different backgrounds and points of view to build products that work better for everyone. This means building a workforce that reflects the diversity of the people we serve. To improve diversity in any meaningful way in our field, we have to bring more diverse people into the field early in their careers. But doing that isn't easy. So you might think, well, sure, go out there and send our recruiters to schools and, in places where more diverse student populations exist, interview more of them, whatever, and then we'll hire more SREs as a result. But it turns out we've tried this and it doesn't work very well. So why is that? Well, there's 4 main problems that we've found. And the first one is that SRE is not a well-known career path. Now, for many people here, I'm sure it is, and it's great to see some young people here, and they'll probably know that this is a job, but in a large part of the world, they don't really know that you can they maybe know software engineer or programmer, but this is much more of a niche type of field. The second one is that even if they have an interest in something like SRE, the opportunities for learning the skills of an SRE are very difficult in a standard kind of university program. Even if you're in a computer science program, it's unusual for these programs to have any kind of systems focus. Many times there's not even like an operating systems class or anything regarding like Linux or distributed systems, the core skills that you would need to do the SRE job. Third one is interview skills. Now, we have there's a lot of criticisms that would be valid about the way that the tech industry interviews people, but if you can't pass the interviews at a tech company, you are not going to get hired. Like, even if you can do the job, it's just a sort of a gatekeepering thing. So you have to have the skills that allow you to pass tech company interviews and get in the door in the first place. Finally, the issue of access. You can't be what you can't see. And if you have a dream to become, an SRE or work at a place like Meta or Google or Amazon or one of these big tech companies, if you don't know anyone and you have never met somebody that works at one of these companies, they're going to seem 10 million miles away. They're literally impossible. It's like, how do you get into working on the moon or something? It's just not something that's accessible. You don't have anyone in your network that's ever worked there. You don't know what it's like. You don't have any exposure to other people who have done these jobs. So these are problems we're up against in early career hiring. If we're going to make a dent in improving the diversity and access to this field, we need to address all these barriers. So how does early career hiring work in practice? At Meta, which is very similar to, I think, what most other large tech companies do, most early career hires in engineering are former summer interns, and a large number of them are from top computer science schools. So what happens is on this diagram, they come out of the top CS schools. Like, we interview them for internships, they do well, they come to Meta as an intern, they have a successful internship, then we make them a full-time offer. They either go back to their schools, or they go directly into working as a full-time employee at Meta. And when they go back to their schools, they're also training and inspiring other people, right? So somebody just comes back to they just started their senior year and they just spent the summer at Meta or Google, and they can tell all their friends and all underclass people, like, hey, this is what it was like, this is what they asked me, this is what they expected. And over time, especially in conjunction with the full-time employees that are then actually also going back to these same CS schools and top CS schools and doing interviews, you end up with these very powerful self-reinforcing networks at the top schools that these are wonderful schools. I'm absolutely not, we love them and nothing against them, but they create a lot of these self-reinforcing effects that make it harder for people to get people to get into the industry if they're not already in these networks. So we decided that for us, as the production engineering team at Meta, the biggest leverage point was to help students get internships, to get that foot in the door into the industry. Ideally at Meta, but if not, at some other tech company. And we decided to do this by creating a pre-internship fellowship program. Basically, we recruit a diverse group of around 100 students and prepare them for an SRE internship at Meta. The fellowship aspect of this program is important. Our interns are full-time employees for the duration of their internship. And as employees, we can't and don't do any favoritism based on gender identity or ethnicity, for example. But a fellowship, on the other hand, is legally considered a scholarship, and there are no restrictions on the criteria you can place on a scholarship. So our fellows would not be Meta employees, and we would get a partner to administer the program and distribute the funds. This gave us a lot more flexibility in how we would recruit participants, especially diverse ones. We decided we'd try to make the program about 100 people initially. We thought that was a good size that we could manage. And let's see what such a program would look like. We decided that our program needed to combine the three kind of pillars of what we think it takes to be a successful SRE, or production engineer. The first pillar is knowledge. So the foundational understanding of things, concepts like Linux, databases, coding, troubleshooting techniques. This is a kind of the bread and butter skills of technical skills of an SRE. Second one, SRE culture. To us, this means how to think like an SRE. Concepts like SLOs, release management, reliability, incident management. And finally, mentorship. So remember back to you can't be what you can't see. What does a career path look like in SRE? How do I get my first job? What are some practical tips to get started once I have my first job? And frankly, just inspiration. We all need that push sometimes, or that example to say like, yeah, I could do that, it's possible, and show us that our dreams are actually achievable. Okay, so given these three aspects, how can we turn that into a practical program? So at this time, it was 2021. We haven't been to the office in a year. The offices are closed, the pandemic's raging. So our program had to be, as a result, fully remote. Although now in retrospect, I think that's actually a blessing, and we were going to keep it remote, because I think it made things easier for people that couldn't travel easily, especially part of our population that we're trying to reach of diverse individuals. And I think also the pandemic made our company's leadership more willing to try new things. Prior to this, I think there would have been a lot of pressure to bring the students on campus and give them kind of the on-campus experience, but that would have been a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive. So I think this actually worked out pretty well. So we decided on a 12-week format and to combine technical curriculum, professional mentoring, and regular interview practice. Along the way, every week we wanted to present our fellows with speakers and other panelists from around the industry and around Meta to give them an idea of what a career would look like in SRE. We also wanted them to prepare a final project, which would give them kind of a little GitHub calling card to use as an example for what they could show their employers and what they've learned. And last but not least, we wanted the students to work together in teams. So being a successful SRE, especially at a large tech company, requires teamwork, requires that you work in groups. And this is the first place that you're going to learn that is in this program. So now we get to the nuts and bolts, like how we're going to do this. We have this great idea, all the stuff that we're going to do, all the stuff we're going to show people, but we have no program, no curriculum, no partners. It's early 2021 and everything's wacky, and we want to get 100 students in seats by June. So what do? Well, divide and conquer. That's the way you solve any problem. And the first pillar for conquering the problem is setting up our core team at Meta. You might think that this project needed a massive effort involving like a huge team of people, or the kind of resources that only exist at a large company. That's not true. We actually had a core team of 4 people working part-time on this program. There was a business program manager that kind of coordinated all of the project meetings and things on the business side. There was a curriculum coordinator that coordinated all of the curriculum that we'll get into in detail in the next couple slides. A mentor coordinator who helped coordinate the various mentors that we had from Meta for the students. And then finally, a kind of, that's me, the program coordinator, just kind of everything else that wasn't covered in the previous few coordinators. And then we also had some, we had our executive sponsor. Sometimes you need somebody to sign checks and, clear out roadblocks. We also had about a dozen mentors that we recruited as production engineers that were part of our team and that would help advise the students. And a couple of other people as speakers and panelists and other folks, as well as recruiting that were going to help us hire some of these people, hopefully. We aimed for about a 10-to-1 mentor to fellow ratio. So in practice, we found that worked pretty well. We'll get into some of that and the details of that in a little more. So like with 100 students, that means 4 people on the core team, 10 mentors. Actually, we had a little bit more because we needed some overlap and mentors went on vacation and stuff. So maybe say like 12 to 15 mentors. So it's not a huge team, and everybody's working part-time. This is sort of a side thing for folks. So not a huge load on that side. The second piece we needed help with was the curriculum. We knew we wanted to teach the students Linux and Linux concepts, but we didn't really want to start from scratch in terms of developing our own content. So fortunately, we were able to partner with the Linux Foundation, and I know there's a bunch of Linux Foundation folks here today, so if anyone here, thank you for helping us. And they gave us access to some of the e-learning modules that they had created for Linux Foundation to use for this program. So that was very nice of them. Meta also sponsors the Linux Foundation, but that was still nice. So this gave us a solid piece of curriculum, so we didn't at least have to go out and reinvent, lessons on basic Linux and troubleshooting stuff. We could kind of start with a more solid base. And finally, we needed, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to have a partner administer the content and the funds. And looking around for a while, we picked an organization called Major League Hacking. This is a company that's, I think, been around for about 10 years. They run hackathons all over the country, probably all over the world. And they have a strong base with students and strong identity with running programs of this nature. So they were a pretty good natural fit for us to run the program with. So here's what we actually decided for the curriculum outline for our first year of the program. It's a 12-week program, as you can see. We had to start at the beginning because some of our fellows had never even used basic tools like Git. And so we had to introduce them really, and most of them had never used Linux, for example. These are individuals that were in programming classes, or sometimes they were in CS programs, sometimes not. So they knew something about programming. They all had to pass some basic programming tests to get in, but they didn't have any exposure to these types of concepts for the most part. And so that's what most of the weeks were devoted to. I'm sorry if it's a little hard to read, but Linux fundamentals, scripting, databases, testing, CI/CD, monitoring. And then there was a couple weeks at the end left for the students to do a project. So they were able to kind of apply what they learned and hopefully build something by the end. We also left 1 week in there, as you can see, week 7 as career week, where we were going to spend the week on interviewing and also on helping the students prepare their LinkedIn and their resume and kind of get that up to, up to the standard. Since this is an open source focused conference, I think it's important to call out how essential open source was in making this program work. Not just Linux, but we essentially created what we call informally the open source SRE training stack, using technologies such as CentOS, Docker, GNU, Python, right? All these you can see here. Meta uses many of these internally. As you may know, we're heavy contributors to things like CentOS and Python, and we use them extensively throughout our own infrastructure. And then we have other things that are proprietary to Meta. For example, internally we have our own graphing and monitoring infrastructure, but it's similar enough to things like Grafana and Prometheus that if you know the concepts in one, you can easily take them back and forth, and you're going to be fine. Also, we couldn't use. Remember, the fellows are not Meta employees. They wouldn't have access to any Meta internal systems, so we couldn't use those systems anyway to train the fellows. But I think it's really, really cool that we can train students in the discipline of SRE at a high level using entirely open source software. And just sort of a preview, we ran for some later stuff in this presentation, but we've seen other companies run this program with the similar stack, and they've also been very happy with the results. So we know this is a good way to, if you're thinking like, how do I train SREs? Like, what do I learn? Well, these are some good foundational technologies to have under your belt. And they're all open source. So thank you, open source. Earlier I mentioned the importance of getting teamwork and getting our fellows to work together in teams. So how does that work in practice? Well, so as we mentioned, we have this concept, there's 100 students, and we have this concept of the pod. And the pod is a group of about 10 students. And each pod then kind of divides themselves up into smaller groups. The pods would meet every day on Discord amongst themselves, and then there's a pod leader, which is someone from MLH, and they would sort of coordinate kind of the daily stand-up, what are we doing today, what are people working on, what are people having trouble with. And so that would happen over some combination of Discord and Zoom. Then in addition, we have the mentors from Meta. They would probably be interacting with the fellows like on a weekly basis. So what we did is we set up Calendly blocks, and the students, the fellows, could book time with the mentors over Calendly. So if they had specific questions, they could get sort of like an office hours essentially, and then that would happen over Zoom or Discord or whatever method folks wanted to use. And this has worked pretty well. The fellows adapted to the remote technology really well and seem to have found ways to communicate and collaborate. So that's kind of the program in a nutshell. Let's talk about some of the results that we saw from 2021. And the first lesson that we learned from our surveys and from the data that we got is that the fellows worked really hard and had a great experience. We graduated almost everyone. And as you can see, like 77% of the fellows spent 25 plus hours a week on the fellowship. So they were really putting in the time. They were really trying to learn everything they needed to, that we were trying to teach them. And super high daily attendance. So these fellows were engaged. What do they understand about SRE as a career path, though? And I think I'm really, really proud of this slide because it shows that we did a good job of teaching them what it is that they need to be able to learn and do if they're going to be in a career of like or around SRE. You can see that we went from like numbers in the 40s and the 50s about what production engineering does or what SRE does or what skills are necessary to basically everybody understanding they know what production engineering looks like as a career path, they know what skills they need, and they know what production engineers do on a day-to-day. Does that mean that they like it or that they would do it? Not necessarily, but we knew going into this, because of the people that were, the type of people that were getting into the program, not everyone was going to end up an SRE out of this program. But we're very happy that at least we did a good job of explaining what the job actually is. Whether the other thing that I think is really great to see is that this was turned into actual jobs by folks. So for our 2021 fellows, approximately 50% had jobs or internships lined up after completing the program or within a few months of completing the program. 23% of those were in SRE type jobs, meaning that the job description had something like SRE or production engineer or something like that. The rest of them were something else, but more than half reported using the SRE skills in their jobs. So remember back to that first slide of, you know, how there's lots of different job titles and whatnot, but like you could be a software engineer, but doing very much a SRE type job in your role as a software engineer. And 87% said that the fellowship gave them advantages in the interview process. So that's really awesome to see, because what that tells us is that even if they didn't go into an SRE type job, even if they went into some, you know, other type of software or technical field, they got a lot of value out of the interview prep and career prep and just having gone through the program in general. So we're really happy about those results. What needed improvement for 2022? So we ran the program again for a second year over the last summer. We got another great group of 100 fellows, but what changes did we make after first year? What learnings did we have? So the number one feedback that we got from our fellows in the first year of the program was that they didn't understand the why of what they were learning until much later when they started their project. So in 2022, we made the project the focus of the fellowship. It ran all the way from the first week to the last week. And we made the curriculum support that. So, for example, as students are learning about containerization, they're actually Dockerizing the application that they're building. So that gave them a chance to both, you know, do the theory and practice. In retrospect, this seems probably fairly obvious, but, you know, not all the things are obvious that are, in hindsight, that are before you do it. The second was that we needed more interview practice. You know, as I mentioned, there's a lot to criticize about the way tech companies do hiring, but the reality is if you want to get a job in this field right now, you need to be able to pass a coding interview in almost any job. And so we added weekly modules to support this coding development and gave them a lot more practice on the type of problems that interviews tend to ask. So, you know, the sort of classic kind of leak code type problems that students would need to know. Third thing, with a program this large, 100 students across 10 pods, it was easy for trouble spots to emerge that we couldn't always see. Like a particular couple, you know, maybe a handful of students weren't getting the material well, or in some cases an entire pod was lagging slightly behind. And we didn't have enough visibility into that. So we started doing weekly surveys to get a better sense of where everybody was and to make sure that people did not get left behind during the program. Finally, we need to provide better support for recruiting. I think this is kind of like a comprehensive thing. We realize that, of course, not everyone's going to go into a job at SRE. Not everyone's going to either apply for or get a role at Meta. So we want to make sure that we have as comprehensive support for people around career development and interviewing technique and LinkedIn and just the whole sort of comprehensive thing. So we made this much more of a part of the program. So even if they didn't end up getting a job with us, they would have skills and kind of all of the framework and infrastructure themselves to get jobs out there in the industry somewhere. All right. So what did we change for 2022? Well, the biggest change, and I'm sorry for the size of this, it's a little small, but we doubled the amount, first off, we doubled the amount of interviewing with a few weeks in between interviews. This gave the fellows a chance to get calibrated with what a real industry interview was like, and for us to get a baseline of where the fellows were. This time between gave the fellows a chance to reflect on the knowledge that they gained and kind of the interview process in general. I think if you haven't ever done an interview at a place like Meta, you're going to come in and you're going to be a deer in the headlights if you've never done that. Especially if you're a student, from college student, and it's intimidating. I know. I've given over 1,000 interviews at Meta, and I know I'm intimidating. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that struggle with this. Good news there, we saw a tremendous increase in interview performance between the first and the second rounds of mock interviews. So we saw huge increases in the number of people that we feel would have gotten to be able to pass a Meta internship interview. So very, very happy about that. This, second, as we mentioned, we implemented these weekly coding challenges, and while there's many types of problems you could focus on, we focused on the ones that you would typically see in our Meta production engineering interviews or sort of similar types of interviews at other companies that we know about. The third one is that, as I mentioned, instead of having the project be like a dedicated 3 weeks at the end, it's all sort of there on the right. They're working on the project from day one to the last day and kind of just adding bits and pieces to their project as they went along. So for example, in the first few weeks, the students develop a web application, then progress to learning how to containerize it, and then do continuous integration testing, and finally monitoring and troubleshooting at the end, when we actually try and break it and see if they can fix it. So we think that making this work concurrent made it easier for us to get better absorption and also application of the curriculum. And then finally, we gave a little bit more time to some of the technical topics, which I think in 2021 had been rushed. So for example, from the previous slide, we showed Linux fundamentals and scripting in the same week. Well, we discovered that that was bad because people that have never used Linux, they can't get both of those concepts in the same week. They probably can't get them in 2 weeks either, but at least 2 weeks was better. So we gave, in 2022, each of these topics their own week, giving the fellows more time to absorb. All right, after 2 years and putting over 200 students through this program, what can we confidently say? Well, number one, the fellows understand SRE, production engineering, as a career path. I think the data that we have very strongly supports that. The second, our fellows learn important foundational knowledge. So whether that's about concepts like cultural concepts of SRE or the actual technical details of what it needs to be an SRE, they've learned those things. We've also helped them build interview skills, technical interview skills that are going to serve them wherever they are, whatever they end up doing. I mean, even if they go into something that's not technical, having some interview practice and interview skills is really useful. But especially in technical interviews, and especially at like the high level of interviewing and rigorous interviewing that we do at places like Meta. And finally, our fellows develop confidence and a professional network. So if you remember, from when we were starting, you can't be what you can't see. And students from most places in the United States or Canada or Mexico, which is where most of our fellows were from, if you don't know anyone from Meta or from Google or from any of these companies, you have no idea what it takes. And you don't have anyone to ask questions of. Contrast that, as I showed earlier on the slide, with these top CS schools where you have tons of those people, lots of alumni, people that have worked in internships at these companies. So giving people access to that professional network and the confidence that, hey, I could do this if I wanted to, if I applied myself, it's doable. So these are, I think, are really the 4 areas where we can say we've made a difference. As SREs, we're always thinking to ourselves, how does this scale? Like, we're at the Scale Conference, 10x or 100x, and we're really proud of our work here, but there's still only 100 students a year. So what opportunities do we have to grow and reach more people? For the first one, I'd like to refer back to the diagram I showed earlier, showing how our top recruiting schools form a self-reinforcing loop of students, interns, and full-time employees. So we'd like to create similar loops at other schools, especially schools with more diverse populations. And we think that's a really powerful way to get more people into this industry. Secondly, we'd like to run this program or something like it at other organizations. For those of you, anyone going to SRECon in 2 weeks in Santa Clara, you can see a conference talk by Salim from Google and Alex from Major League Hacking. They're going to be talking about this. They ran this exact program, the one that we built. They ran it at Google and were successful. They had a good experience running it. You can go see about the talk there. We are trying to get this at more places. There's been a handful of companies that are interested, and we can talk more about that at the end. And then finally, we're even considering like open sourcing the whole program, so maybe something under the Usenix banner, who knows. That's a little bit further out, especially given some of the headwinds that we're facing this year. But ultimately, this isn't a program that like Meta wants to like own. As you can see, it's all open source. If you train people to get in this industry, like eventually they'll work at, if they're good, they'll work at Meta, or someplace like it. So that's kind of how we're thinking of growing this program in the future. Although obviously, as I said, this year being a little challenging with all of the economic weirdness, but we're forging ahead. How can you help? Well, first of all, hire our fellows if you can. If you have open positions or if you're looking for interns, if you look on LinkedIn for Production Engineering Fellow at MLH or MLH Production Engineering Fellow, we don't have like a exact LinkedIn code word, but if you see them, they went through this program and they were trained by the best. I'd like to think. So that's one thing that you can do. Also, consider supporting a similar project at your company. Talk to me. I've also got contact info on the last slide, which is the next slide. Also, John Gottfried from Major League Hacking is here, and you can chat with him as well. This project does not require a ton of money. It is not super expensive. It is what we would call ready to go, like just add money and people. Like you don't need to build the program. We built it already. We know how to run it. It works. So if you have some budget and you have some interest, you should talk to us. And that's all from my presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. And if you want to contact us, there's some contact info Stay tuned for information on the 2023 fellowship, which we hope to be running this summer. We're just awaiting some budget stuff. As I said, this is kind of a weird time for the industry and our company in particular, but we are planning on running it this summer, and you can contact us here if you want to. Thank you very much, and I take questions if there's any time. All right, great. I was totally clear, no questions. But please do hit me up afterwards. I will also be around at the Meta booth later. You can also talk to John directly if you want. And again, everyone on video, thanks for tuning in, and we'll enjoy the rest of your day at Scale. Thank you.